Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am happy to be with you again. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really happy to have with me the Reverend Larry Beane II. And Jeff Deist is supposed to be with us. We're having some technical difficulties getting connected with Jeff, but he should be with us momentarily, hopefully. But in any event, we'll have more than enough to talk about with Reverend Beane. You all know Jeff Deist. He's been a frequent guest on this show. Reverend Beane, this is his first time with us. He is a Lutheran pastor, Missouri Synod. That is the same church body that I'm a member of. Larry Beane's church is in New Orleans. It's the Salem Lutheran Church. Gretna, Louisiana is where it's located. He is also a teacher at Wittenberg Academy online, and he holds a Master's of Divinity degree from Concordia Theological Seminary and an undergraduate degree in history from Thomas Edison State University. And he blogs at a very interesting blog spot. It's fatherhollywood.blogspot.com, where you can go to read some of his material there. One of his sermons that I looked at recently I found very, very interesting. And very enlightening in many ways. And he's also involved in another website, godistonline.blogspot.com. And so I hope that you'll go to some of these websites to check out Larry's work. It's really very interesting. And he has been married for 22 years and has an 11-year-old son, Leonidas. And he says they also have several feline friends as well, so they like cats, apparently. Well, welcome. Thank you, Larry Beane, for joining me today.
Thank you, Jay. It's a real privilege.
Really wonderful to have you with us, and maybe Jeff will come back. I know that you know Jeff. I know he considers you to be a friend, and you have been involved. I did fail to mention that you have also been involved with Lou Rockwell. That is, you've written some articles that have been posted at LouRockwell.com, I should say. So you're a unique individual that I wanted to talk to, in large part. First of all, I'm a Missouri Synod Lutheran. Also, I don't find too many Lutheran pastors who are also of a libertarian mindset. So I found that very interesting. And of course, I first learned about you from Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And Daniel, I think, sat on a panel with you some time ago, and he was very impressed with you as well. And for Daniel, a real strong Catholic to praise a Lutheran, I thought that was pretty good. So, in any event, before we get started, if Jeff comes, I hope he does. If he doesn't, we'll go on anyway without him. But yeah, I'd like to start out by asking you if you can define the term economic hedonism. Hedonism, and maybe then apply it to economics.
Sure. Hedonism is it's sort of a philosophy of life, or sort of a theory of human motivation based on the pursuit of pleasure. So a person who is hedonistic, that's what their main motivation or goal is to just pursue pleasure sort of at all costs. And it's kind of a self-centered, very selfish, kind of shallow, kind of undisciplined lifestyle. It leads to a low time preference, which is just sort of an economic term for to put it in the words of a Queen song, the great philosopher Freddie Mercury, I want it all, I want it now. I mean, that's basically it, and that's what hedonism is. Jeff's article on economic hedonism, I thought, was really, really interesting to sort of pursue hedonism in an economic sense. Jeff may have coined the term, I don't know, but his article dealt with Fed policy, sort of artificially low interest rates and manipulating the money supply. And what this leads to, this kind of low rates and stimulus, it leads to just what we were talking about, a low time preference. It discourages thrift. It encourages people going into debt and being irresponsible. It's a very undisciplined and shallow kind of approach to the economic life of the country and of the world.
Mm-hmm. And of course, as the Austrian economists understand, that you're basically not allowing price discovery of capital. So you're using capital for pleasure, so it's a momentary pleasure. It's what feels good now. In the 1960s, I'm older than you, Reverend Beane, but in the 1960s, I can relate to it. If it feels good, do it was a slogan. So that's what we're talking about. If it feels good, do it. It's never mind a year or 2 or 5 or 10 years down the road. It's what feels good now. Do it, right?
Well, yeah, and it's sort of like economics is about decisions and about what motivates human decision, human action. So if you have the choice of saving money and putting it away for the future, maybe just in case your child gets sick, or hey, I can borrow money for a zero interest or next to a zero interest rate and buy myself a big screen TV that I don't really need. Well, by manipulating interest rates and the money supply and the economy that way, it encourages people to be very hedonistic and to not lay plans for the future and not be prudent, not to invest. And maybe instead of buying the car, I can get some training and education and better my family's life. But it leads to this low time preference and this sort of squandering of opportunity and this, the destruction of taking advantage of opportunity costs that could, opportunities that could provide for betterment in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, saving money today for the future, which is a concept that seems to be almost completely lost in this environment. But that's exactly what we did. I mean, 2008, 2009 came along, and so in order to try to quote-unquote fix things, they pumped huge amounts of money into the system, dropped the interest rates. They had other programs like the Clunker program, I think, to get people to trade in their cars for new cars and things like they got money for trading in their cars and stuff. All kinds of means to try to pull consumption up ahead and try to keep the economic wheels turning a little longer with seemingly no regard for the long term, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it just leads to irresponsibility. You want to train, you want your children to put money away and save it. You don't want them to just spend it all on something they want right now, spontaneously. Life isn't all one or the other. You don't want people to be misers. You don't want to train your children to be miserly, but you don't want them to be hedonist either. And if people are responsible in the way they use their resources, their stewardship of what they own, you can have a well-functioning economy. But if everybody is just living for the moment, and it distorts the economic picture, like you said, and like the Austrian economic theory says, the prices get all distorted, and people who are entrepreneurs and investors can't really make good decisions. It leads to malinvestment and booms and busts and all those horrible things in the economy.
Reverend Beane, help me understand what is a libertarian? Because as I hear you talking, to me, in many ways, I think in the minds of many people, libertarians are more akin to the hedonistic mentality than to the kind of thing that the Austrians might be talking about, and leaving the markets determine the value of money and so forth, and the discipline that comes with a truly free market environment. Can you reconcile the notion? I mean, I believe you subscribe at least to a lot of libertarian ideas. I think of you as a libertarian, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show. How do you reconcile that with? Many people think the Christian religion, the Christians are a bunch of killjoys. That basically Christians are people who really are just, they're just kind of either they're stupid and they don't understand the world they live in, and they just don't. They just need to be educated away from that, or what's the matter with them? I mean, but if you're a libertarian, it seems to me you're more subscribing, not to me necessarily, but I think a lot of people think of libertarians as more hedonism, pot smoking, and that sort of thing. How do you? Can you help us understand how you could have a view towards the libertarian viewpoint, how you might subscribe to it, or at least portions of it, and still be a Lutheran pastor in Missouri Synod nonetheless?
It's a great question, because I think both Christianity and libertarianism are terribly misunderstood, and what they are. So that's a fantastic question. And believe it or not, there are lots of Missouri Synod Lutherans who are becoming quite libertarian in their mindset, in their economics, and in their sort of philosophical mindset. A lot of pastors, a lot of lay people. I know Molly Ziegler Hemingway from the Federalist. She's not completely libertarian, but I know she describes herself as libertarian. Many of her a lot of her writing is really quite libertarian. So I think there's been kind of a shift towards that way of thinking. But the bottom line is that when people hear libertarianism, I think they think sometimes libertinism. Like, for example, you mentioned the drugs. Libertarians advocate legalizing drugs and prostitution, for instance. And in the minds of many people, that means that we're advocating for these things because we want them to be legal. And here I think is the key. Libertarianism is not a system of ethics. What it is, it examines the question of what is the appropriate use of force in law. So, and I'll explain that in a minute, but libertarianism accepts this axiom called the non-aggression principle. That it's very simple. It just says it's wrong to aggress against somebody, to use or initiate force against someone who's peaceful. So, based on that principle, that lays out when is it appropriate to use force in law, in our social interactions. So, to put it in a kind of a religious setting, I won't even use Christianity. Let's say you're Jewish or you're a Muslim. Both of those faith traditions, it's immoral to eat pork. All right, so let's say you're Jewish or you're Muslim, and your next door neighbor is eating a BLT in his backyard, and you find this terribly immoral, and you find it, it's offensive to you, and maybe you even think that he shouldn't be doing it. So you're free to interact with them. You're free to, you can scold him if you want, or you can call him to repent, or you can encourage him to embrace your religion, or you could just ignore him or whatever. But what you can't do, you can't throw a brick through his window. You can't, go over and punch him in the face and steal his sandwich, or you can't. And this is important too. In a libertarian society, you don't get to call the police and have him hauled away in chains and then put in jail or fined. Because those are all forceful responses to something that he's peacefully doing. Just because you're offended doesn't give you the right to use force, you see. So that's really what libertarianism is. It's the idea that not every matter of right and wrong or of morality is going to be settled by force. And when you look at it that way, it really makes a lot more sense, and that's why I think you see a lot more Christians. There are a lot of libertarian Christians, and a lot of some of the really big, famous kind of libertarian thinkers are Christians, and I think that's why it's not a complete matter of morality. It's really limited to the use of force in law.
So I think to a great extent, what we're talking about, the libertarian philosophy is not, doesn't really go against the teachings of Jesus in any way. Jesus never was a forceful person, forceful in the sense that he said, you must, and took away the option or the choice or the free will, right?
Yeah, that's, the ethic of the non-aggression principle, I think, is rooted in Christianity. I think libertarianism philosophically flows from Christianity, and I think the reason is this. I think in Christianity, we Christians believe that human beings are created in the image of God, and therefore committing an act of violence against a peaceful person is immoral. And we believe that's where the origin of rights comes from. And it's embedded in the Ten Commandments. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. In order to live, you have to have property. You have to have clothes and food. And if you take someone else's stuff or you aggress against their person, you're committing, an immoral act. And so I think that philosophy, even unbelievers, people who don't believe in Christianity or subscribe to it, do believe that human beings have rights and that it's wrong to aggress against other people. And I think that's very closely related to Jesus' ethical principle of the Golden Rule, which is actually found all in many different religions, and so really, it's really the natural law is what we're talking about. When we're talking about libertarianism and the non-aggression principle, it's the natural law. If you don't want someone to beat you over the head and take your stuff, then you're obliged to not beat someone else over the head and take their stuff. And it's really the only way you can have a civilized society. So that's really why I think libertarianism meshes beautifully with Christianity.
Yeah, and probably better than we'd think with the other two major religions as well. Now, I'm glad to know that Jeff Deist is with us now, so thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Certainly, Jay. Good to hear from you.
Oh, good to have you with me. Reverend Beane was just mentioning the Golden Rule, and I remember when your boss a few years back mentioned the Golden Rule at the Republican debates, and he was almost booed off the stage. But in any event, by the Republicans, nonetheless, these supposedly upright Christian Republicans who were thinking there was no place for the Golden Rule. But in any event, Jeff, thank you very much for your article that you wrote, and Reverend Beane was talking a little bit about it and complimented you on your insights in that article, and we were just talking about how it meshes very well. Reverend Beane was talking about how it meshes very well with Christianity and the other two monotheistic religions. In your July and August issue, the Austrian, where you wrote, and I'd like to just quote a part of that, the problem with presidential candidates is not so much what they say and believe, but rather what they don't say and believe. Behind the lying and dissembling and obfuscation, there is a palpable suspension of disbelief. Our would-be political rulers simply ignore or fail to grasp the gravity of our economic situation. I don't want too much doom and gloom, but Jeff, can you give us a sense of, when I turn on CNBC or Bloomberg television and listen to the commentators, and they acknowledge things aren't really so good as they should be and so on and so forth, but there's nothing really that grave, there's nothing really that ominous. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing and what you believe we have ahead of us, possibly.
Well, I think it's nice for people to say that to one another, and there is a certain psychology to the marketplace that a lot of what we would call infomercials for the market on outlets like CNBC tend to believe that they can talk up a market, and they also tend to believe they can talk down a market. But if you really want to know where we are, I would just suggest to anyone listening to go to LouRockwell.com today and read a great article there by Jim Rogers, the great hedge fund investor who years and years ago was partnered with George Soros and became a billionaire. Jim Rogers doesn't pull any punches, and he lays out some of the structural and fundamental changes that economies really face around the world. But that, to me, the greater issue is, what is our political class doing about it? Well, what they're doing about it is evading it, ignoring it, worsening it. As Father Beane pointed out, we're caught up in these social issues that really aren't something that the state ought to be controlling. We ought to be forming those rules among ourselves as individuals, among our families, with religious counsel, however we do so. And really, it's none of the business of the state what bathroom we're using, or what the racial complexity, the racial makeup of a certain area is. What these politicians ought to be worrying about, if they worry about anything, is the real structural economic challenges that we've got out there. And all the problems we're talking about can be looked at in the rearview mirror as debt that's already been amassed. But if you're looking ahead, if you're looking at where the freight train is speeding, we've got an entitlement gap of over $200 trillion, Jay, between what we've told people we're going to give them down the road in the form of entitlements and what we're likely to bring in taxes. So the problem with democratic government and the problem with central banks is that they're both designed to ever and always kick this can down the road, to create policies, to take actions, the effects of which are not felt for many years or decades or sometimes even longer. And so the politicians and central bankers who put them in place are long gone, and it's awfully hard for the average guy or gal in the voting booth to go back and connect the dots and see how things that FDR put in place or LBJ put in place decades ago have now come around to bite us. So politics is an awfully poor way to organize a society. And from my perspective, Father Beane gave a definition of libertarianism based on the non-aggression principle, and I like that definition. I would add to it that, to me, a libertarian society is one where the great economic and cultural and social issues of the day simply aren't decided by the state. And since so many of ours are, we find ourselves in the bind that we're in.
Well, they certainly weren't meant to be, I guess, originally, and I guess the question then would be, why have we strayed away from the disciplines that our founding fathers have put in place for us. I mean, I'm thinking first and foremost about the monetary mechanism was to be our dollar was to be based on a set amount of gold and or silver. But somehow along the way, human nature seems to want to I guess, engage in that issue of hedonism. That is, have enjoyment, have pleasure without paying for it or without regard to what it might mean in the future. And we were just talking, Jeff, before you joined us. Father Beane was talking to us about the definition of hedonism and how that has gotten us into so much trouble. You mentioned debt, $200 trillion worth of debt. I mean, it seems to me, though, little by little, we've all gotten entrapped into this system. I mean, I am 69 years of age now. I receive Social Security. I paid into it. But there's this notion that we can have something for nothing. How did we get to this place, Jeff? How did we get to this place, and how can we climb out of it?
Well, in part, we got to it through mass democracy, and partly we got to it through centralization of functions of government and banking that ought to be heavily decentralized. In the past, we don't have to look that far back, even just 50 or 100 years ago, economic problems and contagions were much more controlled locally. We had, a different currency in every country. We didn't have political maneuvering to create things like the Eurozone. We didn't have global IMF as heavily involved in financial markets. We didn't have the U.S. dollar used quite as voluminously as it is today as the world's reserve currency. So what we've done is taken infections from different parts of the world and basically put them into the stream and made them global. So now, if the U.S., God forbid, gets a cold, the whole world is going to get sick because the whole world needs to use our dollars to settle international payments, to buy oil, to do any number of things. So the more we federalize, the more we nationalize, the more we internationalize, the more we globalize, the more we make these problems systemic around the globe. And what we're really doing from both a national and an individual standpoint is we're trying to offload the costs and consequences of our actions onto others. Welfarism does that at the individual level, and central banks and Congress do that at the national level. So I truly believe that a libertarian society, which is one with far less or no government, a libertarian society would be far less libertine in all aspects because it would be harder for both individuals and politicians to offload the costs of their choices onto others.
Well, it seems to me, we've been further and further removed from the decisions that are made, and regulatory bodies in Washington that decide all kinds of things that the people have no say over whatsoever. But there is this attitude of entitlement that seems to have crept in. I mean, I talked to my 93-year-old mother, and she lived through the Depression, and those people, they saw responsibility for their own lives. They believed that they were responsible. Maybe, Reverend Beane, you could opine on this, but to what extent, if the policymakers, or let's say the elite, the intellectual elite, have been successful in separating us from a sense of a supreme being who is a creator, if you will, is that perhaps part of the issue that we're dealing with? In other words, if we've gotten rid of God or gotten rid of a creator or a supreme being, then don't we have to turn to Caesar for our help?
Well, yeah, I think there's something to that. I think it's like the old saying, Richard Weaver, that ideas have consequences. I mean, we've lived for the past, since 1913, we've had the Federal Reserve. We've had this, the ethos is progressivism, economically, politically, education, and it's been bombarding us for 100 years. And I think it has led to a hedonistic culture. I mean, one of the things, if you are a Christian or if you do believe in a deity, it does tend to mitigate against that hedonism because there's something bigger than you that you believe in. We Christians certainly think in those terms. But if you do live in a hedonistic culture, it's fueled by a lot of things. It's complicated, but certainly the rise of progressivism has really radically changed our culture. Again, it's I want it all, I want it now. And in current times, it's almost like we're living the movie Idiocracy. People they want it all, they want it now. They don't know and they don't care where it comes from. So I want a big screen TV, I want an iPhone, I want to be able to watch the ball game. But I don't understand how the TV made it to market or how the iPhone got invented. I don't understand how the players are paid and how did they get to the stadium. And I think we desperately need education. We need to break through this idea that everything could be free. That's not logical. That makes no sense. And when people can see, when they see where how an economy works or how businesses work, that mitigates against some of that hedonism, and it gives people the incentive to plan ahead and to be more disciplined in the way they live their life. And again, with a lot less hedonism. So we need education, and there are tons of sources now that we have technology for that kind of education.
Indeed, Reverend Beane, let me just tell people that encourage them to go to fatherhollywood.blogspot.com and also to read some of your articles at Lou Rockwell for some of that education that you're talking about, and also, of course, the Mises Institute. Jeff, with just a minute left, you had some encouraging words at the end of your article, your brief article on economic hedonism. Could you just pass those along with us to our listeners for the last minute or so we have left here?
Well, the number one gatekeeper in society, or modern society, has always been the media, and the media has always been largely state-controlled, and that gatekeeper is breaking down. I mean, that digital platforms do give us a new way to communicate across borders to each other, and I think that the cost of producing one's thoughts has never been cheaper. So it almost puzzles me sometimes the way states have allowed the Internet to go as far as it's gone in some ways. The fact that we're still relatively free to speak our minds, at least in the U.S., at very little cost online. So I think that that's something that we all have to take great hope in, that information has never been cheaper, it's never flowed better, and we all know that ultimately the best idea, the idea that ought to win, is liberty, and so it's up to us to make sure that happens.
And that's why you go to Mises.org and also follow up with Father Hollywood's Father Hollywood. Reverend Beane's Father Hollywood, blogspot.com, and also his articles at Lou Rockwell. Thanks, both of you, for being with us today. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope we can do it again sometime in the not-too-distant future.